Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. All week long, we've talked a crap ton of college hoops. We previewed all the big games earlier in the week. Yesterday's show, we reacted to, who do we react to? Kentucky losing, Arkansas winning, Tennessee winning, etc. Then Wednesday happened, and things got crazy. Okay, so Tennessee. Let me start off. Kentucky was obviously a top 5 team coming into the week. They lose to Clemson. We think it's crazy. Then Wednesday happens. Number 1 Kansas loses to Creighton. Number 2 Auburn loses at Duke, and number 5 Marquette loses at Iowa State. Should mention the Kansas game, by the way, was on the road as well. And so I bring it up because, listen, what I could do is spend like 8 minutes talking about, oh, Kansas, they missed threes. What does it mean? Is Creighton actually better than we thought they were? I'll be honest. Creighton was like a 30% three-point shooting team coming into that game. They hit 41%. Kansas missed a few. I don't think Kansas is a terrible team because Creighton got hot. That game actually reminded me of when Creighton hosted UConn last year, and UConn could do nothing right. Creighton could do nothing wrong, whatever. Auburn, this is not time to overreact. They went to Duke, who I think is really good. Duke got crazy production from Isaiah Evans that nobody saw coming, and Auburn lost by 3 or 4 points. And then Marquette lost at Iowa State. Like we all agree, Hilton. There's a reason they say what happens in Hilton Coliseum is, quote, Hilton magic. Good teams lose there all the time. And so instead of kind of breaking down all these games, what does it mean? What I instead want to do is just ask a very simple question. We're a month now into the season, and I think it's hard to gauge like who's good, who's not based solely on rankings, because the thing is, to the credit of college basketball, everybody has played everybody, okay? Think about Duke has already played at Arizona, Kentucky on a neutral, Kansas on a neutral, Auburn at home. Auburn has already played Houston on a neutral, UNC on a neutral, Iowa State on a neutral, at Duke. Alabama's played Houston on a neutral, at North Carolina, at Purdue, Illinois. Like, think about all these games that we have already seen. So instead of going off of rankings, instead of overreacting to a crazy Wednesday night in college hoops, what I instead want to do is this. I want to tell you who I actually believe is good. Let's put aside preseason bias, because, by the way, some of my preseason teams that I like kind of stink. UConn's not playing well right now, even though they did beat Baylor. Shout out to the Huskies. I thought that was a gritty win. I thought Houston was my preseason national championship pick. They're not playing very well right now. So let's put aside preseason bias and let's put aside records. Because, again, a lot of good teams have played each other. And I want to give you the 8 teams that I believe have separated themselves so far in college basketball. Number 1. And I'm going to put them in order of, by the way, the teams in terms of like how I think they are in terms of how good they are. So number 1, best team that I've seen, one of those teams coming off a loss on Wednesday night, that's the Auburn Tigers. Listen, Auburn, I'm not going to sit here and, oh my God, they went to Duke and they lost in a game where they jumped out and were in complete control for about 12 minutes until Isaiah Evans went ridiculous, okay? And so you look at what Auburn has done so far. Auburn, like I said, they've beaten Iowa State on a neutral. They've beaten they destroyed UNC on a neutral. They destroyed Memphis on a neutral. They beat Houston. Like, I'm not going to criticize Auburn for losing at Duke. You look at this team, I think they're certainly the most veteran team in college basketball. I think 12 of their 13 scholarship players or something are seniors. But they're also, I think, the most complete team. Janai Broome down low, rebounding, shot blocking, and, of course, scoring. Tahad Pettiford is a great scorer when they need to. Miles Kelly is providing three-point shooting. They have depth, Chaney Johnson and Dylan Cardwell along the front line of that team. And so I look at Auburn, they're the best team I've seen, period. Actually, end of story. I don't want to say it's not even close, but they're the best team I've seen. I'm not going to freak out because they lost one game to a team that, at Duke. A lot of teams lose at Duke. Auburn is the best team I've seen so far. Number 2, I think it's going to surprise some people. I'm going to take Iowa State as the second best team that I've seen in college basketball. Let me explain why. Iowa State's only loss so far this season. Do you know what it was? I think you could probably guess. If you don't know, they lost to Auburn by 2 points in a game that they led by 18 points at the half, okay? So basically, if Iowa State got one more defensive stop against Auburn, or Auburn didn't get one more defensive stop, Iowa State wins that game, and we're probably talking about Iowa State the same way that we're talking about Auburn right now. You look at this team, so far, they do have the loss to Auburn, but outside of the loss to Auburn, you go back to what they did in Maui. They absolutely destroyed Colorado. They took care of Dayton. And then I thought on Tuesday night, it was a very impressive victory. Wednesday night, it was a very impressive victory over Marquette. Yes, it was at home. They don't get discredited for that. And I think the thing that's different about this team, they're just much better offensively. This has always been a defense-first program, but Keyshawn Gilbert, veteran guy, he's been there a few years, transferred from UNLV. He is averaging 17, close to 18 points per game, as well as 6 assists per game. Iowa State, to me, is probably the second best team I've seen. Like I said, they get one more stop against defensive stop against Auburn. They're, in conversation for the number one team in the country right now. Let's keep it going. Number 3, a team that, I'm continuing to be blown away by, Tennessee Volunteers, okay? And we talked about him on yesterday's show. Rick Barnes, I think Rick Barnes might be the most underrated coach in all of sports, because I get that he has not made a Final Four. At Tennessee, he made one at Texas. But this argument that he doesn't win in the tournament, that's done. Made an Elite Eight last year where they lost to Purdue, who was clearly the second best team in the country. Made several Sweet 16s over his time at Tennessee. A couple years ago, they lost to Purdue. Sorry, Tennessee fans, you know that deal. Lost a few years ago in the Sweet 16 to Florida Atlantic. So, this is a team, the last 2 seasons, Elite Eight, Sweet 16. So don't tell me they don't win in the tournament. But you look at this year's team, I am so impressed because they lost a lot off last year's team. Dalton Connect is gone. Jonas Adu transferred. Other guys went pro. And they're 7-0. They're 8-0, coming into this week. And by the way, they're going to be number 1 the next time a new poll comes out, because obviously the 2 teams ahead of them, Auburn and Kansas, lost. Now, I understand they haven't played the toughest of competition yet, but they haven't played nobody either. Played Baylor on a neutral. Baylor was a little bit banged up off that triple overtime game against St. John's. Played Virginia, played Syracuse, but it's also worth noting they did beat Louisville at Louisville when Louisville was at full strength, and Louisville's a good team. So I have Tennessee at number 3. They'll probably be number 1 in the polls. I'll say this, schedule's going to get tougher. I really like what Rick Barnes has done. I really like those transfers too, by the way. Chaz Lanier, I did not know he was this good. I know that Kentucky wanted him, BYU wanted him, but I was not aware he was so good. Let's get to number 4. Another team that lost on Wednesday night, the Kansas Jayhawks. And Kansas is weird because you can see the talent. I saw him in person against Duke a few days ago. But I don't think Bill Self has totally even figured it out yet. AJ Storr, who I thought was the best transfer in the portal, he's been in the starting lineup. He's been out of the starting lineup. Rylan Griffin, a transfer from Kansas, has been in the starting lineup, out of the starting lineup. It feels like the 3 returnees from last year are kind of the same guys, maybe a little bit better of a version of themselves. DeJuan Harris, KJ Adams, Hunter Dickinson. But the new guys, they're still trying to figure it out. What makes it so impressive is that they're sitting here right now at 7-1. They're only lost to Creighton. We talked about it a minute ago. I'm sorry. It was kind of fluky. I think if you play that game on a neutral court, Kansas wins easily. I think if they play 10 times in Omaha, Kansas probably wins 6 or 7 of them. And so I'm not going to criticize them for taking one loss to a team that was top 25 in the preseason on the road. Kansas is still good, and I think there's another level to get to. They also have the wins to back it up. Duke on a neutral, UNC at home, Michigan State on a neutral, which looks better after Michigan State played well in Maui. I have Kansas at number 4. Number 5, going to be a little bit controversial. I got the Duke Blue Devils. Duke's really good. I'm sorry. If you want me to criticize them, if you want me to tear down Duke, if you want this to be one of those pods where we just make fun of Duke, that's an old shtick, okay? You can hate Duke because of Coach K, but the jokes are over. They're a really good team. First off, probably the best win of the season in college basketball over Auburn. Another great win at Arizona. I know Arizona might not be very good, but that's still a really tough place to play. And there are 2 losses. I hate to say it, Kansas fans. I hate to say it, Kentucky fans, but those were games where they controlled big stretches of those games. The Kentucky game, listen, they were the better team for 28, 29, 30 minutes in that game. Credit Kentucky for making all the plays down the stretch. But Duke, basically, if John Shire could run an out-of-bounds play rather than just ISOing everybody, Duke might be sitting here right now at 8-0 with wins over Auburn, Arizona, Kansas, and Kentucky. And so I bring it up because I know it's going to be controversial, because I know Kentucky beat them on a neutral court. I do not have Kentucky ahead of them. But what do you want me to say? Duke is really good. Cooper Flagg's good. And by the way, if you get half of what Isaiah Evans gave you on Wednesday night, it adds the scoring punch that you need. I have Duke at number 5. Number 6, team I just mentioned, team that lost to Duke earlier in the year. It's the Kentucky Wildcats. Listen, I still don't get how people did not like this team in the preseason. Now, listen, I had them at number 13 or 14. I didn't have them at number 1 or number 2. But I think this is one of the 10 best teams in college basketball, no doubt. Now, the negative, they're coming off of a loss. We'll talk about the Gonzaga game in a minute. And I think, it did show some weaknesses. And by the way, it was weaknesses not just with the team, but with Mark Pope. He acknowledged after the game, I should have put Lamont Butler back in sooner. I should have put Andrew Carr back in sooner. And I think there's flaws with the team. I think there's major flaws with every team I've seen so far, except for maybe Auburn. And so with Kentucky, again, I'm not going to tear them down because they went on the road and lost to a 7-1 team, now 8-1 in a game that they could have won. Kentucky, I have at number, what do I have them at? Number 6. By the way, we're going to be previewing the Gonzaga game in just one moment. Number 7, Alabama Crimson Tide. A lot of SEC in these rankings. By the way, if you're looking, that SEC ACC challenge, the SEC won 14-2. That's another conversation for another day. But don't tell me it's just about the SEC has more money than everybody. They've invested in coaches and resources, whatever. So we talked about Tennessee, we talked about Auburn, we talked about Kentucky. Now let's talk Alabama. Alabama went on the road, and it wasn't really close against North Carolina. Don't look at the final score. Just look at how the game was played, and Alabama dominated. That was after losing their best three-point shooter in Latrell Wrightsell. I still look at Alabama. They still have size. They still have depth. I think the size really stands out. I mean, they're so big. I forget who tweeted it. It might have been, I can't remember who. Somebody tweeted it. But they basically said, they switch 6'10 guys on guards, and it's no big thing. Like Jaron Stevenson can guard basically probably 1 through 5. Grant Nelson can probably guard 2 through 5. Cliff Omoyori can do pretty well as well. Darian Reed, Aiden Sherrill, they're so big. They're so athletic. And, oh, by the way, they lose Latrell Wrightsell. I thought it was a cool story. Hunter Millette, the transfer from Pepperdine, was supposed to redshirt and takes off the redshirt to help the team. I thought that was pretty cool. He played very well against North Carolina. Only concern with Alabama, they're not shooting the ball well right now. Defense is a little bit up and down, but here's the bottom line. Neutral court win over Illinois. Neutral court win over Houston. Win over North Carolina. This is a very good team. Final team, and I don't want to spoil it because we're going to talk about them in a minute, but it is Gonzaga. Listen, I don't think Gonzaga's a perfect team. I don't think they have the long-term upside of what they had a year ago, but it's also worth noting what stands out to me about Gonzaga. You know what stands out about Gonzaga is the fact that they were really good last year, made a Sweet 16, returned everybody. I really like the pieces they brought in the portal. Michael Ajayi, big guard, kind of plays more of a forward-ish role for them. Caliph Battle, who, of course, was at Arkansas last year. I thought they lacked some scoring. And so you go ahead and add those guys to the mix. Gonzaga's a really good team. We're going to talk about them in a minute. Really quick, I think what's interesting now, a month into the season, some of the teams that are not on this list. Listen, I'm a UConn guy. UConn's struggling right now. I think this UConn team, now it's tough to gauge because Alex Karaban did not play on Wednesday night against Baylor. But I think it's interesting. UConn, I think this is like an old school Dan Hurley team. It's going to be much more about defense and about effort and about want to. I don't think they have the offensive skill that they have had in previous years. Listen, I still think they're a top 20-ish type team, but I think they're going to have to grind their way to a lot of victories. I think they're going to take some losses in Big East play. Remember last year, where'd they go? They went 18-2 in the Big East. That's absurd. So UConn's not in there. Houston, I still haven't totally figured out Houston, but losses to Alabama, losses to Auburn. Something's just not quite right with that team. Arkansas, I don't think I think it's interesting with Arkansas. We talked about it yesterday. I had them as a top, 12, 13 team in the preseason. I'll be curious with Jonas Adu now healthy. Does it change things on defense? They were not good against Illinois. Big game for Arkansas next week against Michigan. Arizona's a mess. Listen, I think Marquette's good. I don't know that they're in that upper tier. I'm sure Purdue fans will get mad that I don't have Purdue in the upper tier, and I do have Alabama. But listen, you beat Alabama by a handful of points at home. It was a great game. You also lost at Marquette. I don't have Marquette in this list either. By the way, you basically needed a buzzer beater put back to beat Ole Miss. I'm not trying to criticize. I'm just talking the truth. So those are my top 8 teams in college basketball right now. Auburn, Iowa State, Tennessee, Kansas, Duke, Kentucky, Alabama, and Gonzaga. Those are my top 8.